Welcome to Short Movie Channel. Our movie today begins in the year 1974, in a house near Lake Amityville. We see a man named Ronald waking up from a strange vision, hearing voices whispering to him. Catch them, kill them. When the clock strikes 3:15 a.m., Ronald loads his gun and goes from room to room, killing his entire family. His young daughter, Jody, hears the gunshots and tries to hide in the closet, clutching her favorite teddy bear. But Ronald finds her and kills her too, telling her he loves her before pulling the trigger. This incident was a real-life case that shook the entire country, especially when Ronald claimed during investigations that the house made him do it. A year later, we are introduced to George and Kathy, a newlywed couple. Kathy has 3 children from her previous marriage, and her son, Michael, has a good relationship with George and likes him. The family starts searching for a new home, and while driving near Lake Amityville, George assumes the houses in the area are too expensive for them. But Kathy doesn't seem to care, and as soon as she spots a beautiful house by the lake, she calls the realtor to arrange a visit. They find the house to be huge, yet surprisingly cheap, which makes George suspicious. As they explore, Kathy notices dark stains on the ceiling but doesn't think much of it. Their son, Billy, is fascinated by the boathouse outside since he owns a boat himself. Meanwhile, the realtor hears strange noises in the house but brushes them off. Eventually, George and Kathy decide to buy the house, even if it means cutting back on expenses for a few months because the price is just too good to pass up. George remains hesitant, and when he asks the realtor why the house is so cheap, she hesitates to answer. But George simply says, "Houses don't kill people. People kill people." A few days later, the family moves into their new home and spends the first few days enjoying their time together, making happy memories. One night, George starts feeling extremely cold, while Kathy doesn't notice anything unusual. He heads down to the basement to add more firewood to the fireplace, and hears strange noises. At first, he thinks they're coming from the alarm clock, but then he realizes the clock isn't even plugged in. He soon discovers that the sound is actually coming from the vents due to the wind. As he heads back to bed, he catches a glimpse of Jody's ghost in the room, but when he looks closely it disappears. Dismissing it as his imagination, he goes back to sleep. The next morning, George wakes up coughing heavily. While Kathy is cleaning the house, she hears their daughter, Chelsea, talking to someone in her room. But when she checks, there's no one there. When Kathy asks who she was talking to, Chelsea says she has a new friend, but in reality, she sees Jody's ghost inside her closet. Chelsea even draws a mysterious picture of her and tells her to keep it a secret. Meanwhile, George is outside chopping wood when Michael approaches him wearing a strange iron headpiece he found in the basement. George gets angry and warns him never to go down there again because it's going to be his new office. Later, he feels guilty and apologizes to Michael, giving him a hug. That evening, George and Kathy hear their dog, Harry, barking furiously. They follow the sound and find Chelsea standing on the boathouse deck, holding a balloon. She takes a while to respond to them, and when they finally get her back inside, she tells them that Jody just wanted to see the boat. After this eerie event, the family returns to the house, and George locks up the boathouse tightly. At night, Michael hears strange noises and feels the urge to use the bathroom. When he tries to wake Billy to go with him, he decides to be brave and go alone. As he reaches the hallway, he looks out the window and notices that the boathouse door is open. Fear grips him, and he rushes to the bathroom. After finishing, he tries to wash his hands, but the faucet doesn't release any water. Suddenly, a terrifying ghost appears beside him, and blood starts pouring from the faucet instead of water. Michael panics and runs back to his bed. At that moment, the furniture in the house starts moving on its own, and the windows open and shut by themselves. George wakes up to the sound of gunfire and rushes out of his room to check on the kids, unaware of the blood seen by people in nightmares. When he enters the boys' room, he's shocked to see someone who looks exactly like him standing next to their lifeless bodies, before that figure suddenly kills himself. Then, George wakes up, realizing it was all just a nightmare. He looks at the clock and sees that it's 3:15 a.m. George gets up to close the window but notices that the boathouse door is still open, with a balloon floating outside. He assumes Chelsea might have gone inside, so he rushes over. But when he gets there, he only finds their dog, Harry, barking at bubbles in the water. George steps into the water to investigate but finds nothing. As he returns, he sees Jody standing by Chelsea's bedroom window. In an instant, she shifts positions and appears next to Chelsea on the other side of the room. Panicked, George runs inside and enters Chelsea's room, only to find her sound asleep. When he opens the closet, he doesn't see Jody hanging inside. The next morning, a strange stain appears in the room. When Kathy comes to check it out, George tells her that this is the only warm spot in the house because someone keeps opening the windows. He also tells her that Harry woke him up last night and that he found the boathouse keys in Billy's room, making him suspect that Billy is playing a prank on him because he doesn't like him. 2 weeks later, George asks Billy to apologize for what he did, but Billy refuses, saying he didn't do anything. While Kathy is in the kitchen, the magnetic letters on the fridge start moving on their own, forming the phrase, "Catch them and kill them." Then, she hears footsteps running behind her. When she turns around, she sees the eerie message on the fridge and becomes terrified. She rushes to find George, but when she returns, she finds him casually drinking milk by the fridge, and the message is gone. She assumes she was just imagining things. That night, George doesn't want to stay with the babysitter, but he changes his mind when he sees that the sitter is an attractive young woman named Lisa. We learn that Lisa used to babysit for the family before. After telling the whole story, she explains that at first, Ronald thought his dog was evil. But after a few days, he started seeing his family as demons, so he killed them too. At that moment, Michael enters the room and hears the story. Lisa tells him to cover his ears so he won't listen, but he hears everything anyway. Then, Lisa describes in detail what happened to the family, and takes them to the closet where they found Jody. Chelsea steps inside and tells them that Jody says Lisa is a bad babysitter. That's when they realize that Jody was the reason Lisa got kicked out of the house in the first place. After a while, Billy dares Lisa to enter the closet. She actually goes in, ignoring Chelsea's warnings when she tells her that what she's doing might upset Jody. Lisa then finds Jody's teddy bear lying on the floor, and when she bends down to pick it up, the door suddenly slams shut. She writes a message saying, "I hate her." In the light, the words start flickering on and off, and Jody appears in the closet, touching the bullet wound on her head. Lisa screams in terror as she sees horrifying visions. The boys rush to help, and after a while, an ambulance arrives to take Lisa away. She is in shock and hysterical. George gets upset with the boys for pulling such a dangerous prank on Lisa. But Billy insists that it wasn't them, it was the house. The kids then say they don't want to sleep in that room again after learning about the tragedy that happened there. However, George forces them to stay in the room against their will. Later, when Kathy goes to check on Chelsea, Chelsea tells her that Lisa was really mean to Jody. That's why Jody hurt her. She also says that she thinks Kathy is a good mom and won't hurt her, but she hates the bad man who lives in the house. He's the one making her do bad things. The next day, George makes Billy chop wood until late and even skips his dinner. Kathy sees that George is being too harsh with Billy, but George insists the boy needs to be toughened up. Sometime later, while working in the basement, George hears the parents' voices through the air vents, calling him a monster. He also hears a strange voice telling him to grab them and kill them. When he touches the wall where the hole is, he suddenly finds himself in a strange room filled with tables and faucets dripping blood. On one of the tables there's a corpse. As he approaches, the corpse rises and tells him, "Kill them." After the vision ends, George rushes to the bathroom and vomits. When he tries to take a shower to calm his nerves, arms suddenly appear and pull him into the water, trying to drown him. He struggles to free himself, screaming, until Kathy enters the bathroom and helps him. The next day, she takes him to the doctor, but the doctor finds nothing wrong. George tells them he hasn't felt right since they moved into the house. When the doctor suggests he see a psychiatrist, George refuses, saying, "I'm not crazy." Meanwhile, at home, Billy is watching over his younger siblings. Chelsea looks for her teddy bear and finds it lying outside. Suddenly, they hear Chelsea's voice, and when they look up, they see her standing on the edge of the house's roof. George grabs a ladder and climbs up while Kathy rushes inside to reach her through the window. Chelsea tells her that she's going to go with Jody. But at the last moment, Kathy grabs her just in time. Unfortunately, she slips off the roof. George jumps down from the ladder and rushes to catch Chelsea. Later, Kathy scolds Chelsea for what she did. When Chelsea mentions Jody's name, Kathy gets even angrier and tells her not to say that name again, insisting that Jody isn't real. Chelsea then says that Jody was going to take her to see her dad. Kathy realizes her daughter did this because she misses her father. When George hears this, he says, "This family is insane," then grabs his things and moves to the basement. Sometime later, Kathy visits Father Calloway and tells him she feels like there might be evil spirits in the house. He isn't surprised and tells her that she's living in the house where the tragedy happened. Meanwhile, George is chopping wood and making Billy hold the logs. Billy flinches when the axe gets too close to his hand. When he starts crying, George yells at him, telling him to toughen up and act like a man. That night, George watches old home videos of the family playing happily together. Suddenly, he starts hallucinating. He decides to go to bed, but at exactly 3:15 a.m., he wakes up to a voice whispering, "Kill them!" George walks out of the basement and finds all the doors in the house wide open. He manages to secure the boathouse, but then George takes his axe and heads to the boathouse. There, he is attacked by a zombie-like creature. He fights back and kills it with his axe. When he regains consciousness, he realizes that the creature he killed was actually Harry, their family dog. Overwhelmed with guilt, he hides the body and cleans up the blood. The next morning, George can't stop feeling guilty and thinking about what happened. Kathy tries to convince him that they need to leave the house, but he refuses. He grabs her hand tightly, hurting her, and then they start arguing. The kids walk in and interrupt them, asking about Harry. George says, "He probably ran away," and ignores Billy when he insists that Harry would never do that. Later that afternoon, Father Calloway visits the house. As soon as he steps inside, he notices Chelsea holding Jody's teddy bear. He pulls Kathy aside and tells her that Jody was buried with that bear and that it shouldn't be in their house. When he begins to bless the house, all the doors around him slam shut. Then, he hears a loud buzzing sound coming from the air vents. When he looks inside, a massive swarm of flies suddenly attacks him. Then the door suddenly opens, and he runs out of the house, terrified, ignoring all of Cassie's pleas for help. He gets in his car and drives away. When Cassie turns around, she bumps into George, who hugs her. That night, George struggles to sleep because of the strange noises he heard. Meanwhile, Harry is watching TV when, out of nowhere, the same vision that Ronaldo used to see appears on the screen. They tell him to kill them. George goes outside to escape the noises, and Cassie sees him from the window, suffering. On the 28th day in the house, Cassie goes to the library to dig into the tragedy that happened there. She discovers that Ronaldo also used to hear strange voices, and on the 28th day, he killed his entire family. Later, the police found a notebook with the same words she had seen written on the fridge. She continues searching for information about the house and finds out that a priest used to torture girls there. Among his tools was the strange metal object that Michael had found in the basement. Cassie rushes to tell George everything, and Calloway admits that he never believed Ronaldo when he came to him with the same problem. But now he does. That means Cassie needs to get her family out of that house immediately. Meanwhile, George is exhausted from the voices tormenting him. He starts breaking through a section of the basement, revealing a wall full of worms. When he breaks through it, he finds the room he had been seeing in his nightmares. Inside, he sees all the ghosts of the Americans the priest had tortured. At the end of the corridor, George finds the priest himself, who starts reenacting what happened the day he died. The priest then kills himself, ensuring his spirit remains trapped in the house. As George is putting his clothes on, he suddenly wakes up to the sound of the phone ringing. In a daze, he rips the phone off the wall. When Cassie returns home, she finds George at the boathouse, searching the water with a flashlight. He begins killing the spirits in the water with the boat's propeller. When Cassie calls out to him, George turns and shines the flashlight directly on her face. Cassie loses her balance and falls into the water, her hair getting tangled in the motor. Just as George moves to check on her, he sees the face of a demon instead. Panicked, he revs up the boat's motor to get rid of it. Cassie struggles until George finally snaps out of it and sees her for who she really is. He lets her go. When Cassie goes inside, she finds Chelsea in the basement, standing in front of coffins with all their family's names on them. Suddenly, George appears and acts strangely, scaring Cassie and Chelsea. They run upstairs, encountering two boys along the way, and try to escape. But George grabs a shotgun and starts chasing them. They block the furniture behind them, trying to slow him down. But they can't find a way out. Every door and window in the house locks itself. Eventually, George reaches them. He grabs Cassie by the hair and hits her, refusing to let go until Billy fights back. Chelsea helps her mother get to her bedroom window, which is open since it belonged to Jody's old room. They escape onto the roof. When George tries to get back inside through another window, the priest's spirit frightens him. They climb down safely. Cassie then points a gun at George, threatening him. He dares her to shoot, but she can't bring herself to kill her husband. Instead, she knocks him out with the gun. As George regains consciousness, he remembers their happy memories together. But when he snaps out of it, he tries to attack Cassie with an axe. He quickly realizes he's hallucinating and stops. When he fully wakes up, he tells Cassie to kill him. Instead, she knocks him out again. She and the kids tie him up and drag him to the boat. As they sail away, George comes to and remembers what happened to Ronaldo's family. He wants them to leave him behind, but Cassie insists that the kids help him onto the boat. Once they are far from the house, George says he no longer feels its influence. They all agree to leave and never return, not even to retrieve anything. Back at the house, it creaks and shifts on its own. The clock stops at 3:15, and an old locket falls from under the floorboards. A ghostly force pulls Jody underground. And that's it for our movie today. Hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like and subscribe.